In this video, we are going to explore various features of CHECKSUM by working with its prototype tool. Let us start by logging in as John and selecting a team. If you notice over here, this demo version of the prototype is pre-bundled with examples that we are going to explore. Let us start by having a look at a class diagram example. Once we launch the class diagram designer, we are immediately prompted to select a modeling activity type. This denotes the type of work that we wish to do on this diagram. We're just going to go ahead and select General and open the designer. The class diagram designer that you see over here on the left hand side is an open source class diagram design tool called Nclass. We integrated Checksum into this tool. On the right hand side, you can see Checksum's change tracking history list. It includes all the change tracking operations that were conducted in order to create this diagram. And these include create, update, and delete operations. Users working on the diagram can explore this list to see what has been done, and they can even select one of the items in the list in order to highlight its corresponding element on the diagram. For example, the first item in the list says that John updated the multiplicity of a certain relationship. If we double click that, we can see that the corresponding element is highlighted, and in this case it's the resides at association. Users have the ability to configure what kinds of elements and properties they want to track. So if we click on this button over here, we can see that in this case, for the class diagram, we are tracking a variety of element types and properties. For example, we are tracking classes, enums, interfaces, and so on, alongside their corresponding properties. Users can filter out the list of changes by using the search bar. They can say, for example, that they only want to show operations that involve creating elements. If we click search over here, you can notice that the operations were filtered out. Similarly, we can still double click the items in the list in order to highlight their corresponding elements. For example, here John created a class. We can see that this class is the address class on the class diagram. Now, if we want to show all the operations again, we can similarly go ahead and reselect what we want in the filters and research. Now, if we would like to explore a different view of the changes, we can use the history browser tool over here to see the changes in two different forms, in a tree view over here on the left hand side and on a timeline on the right hand side. In the tree view, the operations are grouped under the user who conducted them, and on the timeline you can see the operations in a color-coded fashion alongside the user who created them. Users can zoom in and zoom out on the timeline to show more or less data on the screen. They can place the cursor over one of the change tracking operations in order to see the full text if that was hidden due to zooming out. And similarly, as we did with the design tool, we can actually search in order to filter these operations. Let's say, for example, we only want to show the operations again that involve creating elements. We can just do that here. If we want to show the operations that involve creating classes in particular, we can even filter out further. Let's have a look at another example of the history browser tool that pertains to a randomly generated set of changes. In this case, we randomly generated changes for a class diagram, and these changes involved multiple users. If you look over here, you can see that the changes were done by 4 different users. In this case, you see a wider variety of operations here on the timeline. Similarly, we can still zoom in and out, and in this case, the users are also color-coded in order to allow the user working with the history browser to easily differentiate what has been done and by whom. Similarly, we can filter out this data by using the search bar. So if we say, for example, we want to only show the creation operations that were done by Corey, we can filter that out, and these operations will appear over here. If we want to show the creation operations that were done by everyone, again, we can go back and see those. If we go back to the class diagram, assume that we want to perform a certain change. Let's say, for example, consider the date of birth property. Say we want to change the data type of this property from date to date time. This is directly reflected in the change tracking list over here, as you can see. If we want, for example, to delete this association, this is similarly reflected in the list. Let's also delete this class address, and that's reflected in the list. If we go back to the history browser tool pertaining to this class diagram example, and let's say this time we want to show all the operations that involve deleting elements. If we hit search, you can see over here that the two delete operations that we just created now appear as part of our change tracking data. Let's go ahead and close the class diagram examples and have a look at a workflow example. If we run the workflow designer over here, we're similarly prompted to select the modeling activity type, so we're just gonna go ahead and say general. And this time we are loading the designer from the Windows Workflow Foundation. This is a reusable workflow design component that we integrated CHECKSUM into. As you can see as well, on the right hand side, you still have the list of changes that were conducted to create this particular example that you see over here. And as we've done with the class diagrams, if we add a new element to the list, to the diagram, or do any kind of modification, this is actually reflected over here in the list of track changes. You can see as well on this workflow that this particular element was blocked by John. This means that John created this element and blocked other users from modifying and deleting it. Let's say, for example, we want to do a similar kind of blocking. Let's say John wants to block fill order, and we go to the access rights tab over here and say, let's lock this element and let's prevent, let's say, Jane from working with it. If we say OK, we can see that this was blocked by John on a certain date. If we log out now from the system, let's say we want to close this diagram and log out and re-log in this time as Jane. If we go back to the workflow designer, so just load the same example, we can see that these two elements are now disabled because they were blocked by John. They were blocked for Jane, and hence Jane can no longer modify these elements. If we just reclose this again, log out and re-log in as John, we can see what we saw before. The elements are now re-enabled because John was the person who did the blocking. This allows users to prevent others from modifying certain elements in case these elements need further investigation, for example, or further work. Let us have a look at the history browser pertaining to the flowchart that we saw over here. Just as we saw with the class diagram, the operations are grouped by the type of user, and they're shown on the left hand side in a tree, and they're shown on the right hand side on a timeline. Now, if you've noticed throughout all these windows, whether the designer or the history browser, there was paging underneath the data. This allows users to go through large sets of data without having to load all the data at once, which could be time consuming. Now, in this case, we have very few changes, so we just have one page. But if we go back to the history browser tool that had random operations for a class diagram, that has hundreds of changes. So in that case, users can just navigate around through this data page by page in order to explore it. Now let's close all these examples and head for another type of diagram, which is a concrete user interface, so a graphical UI. In this case, we're going to see a history browser and the history player pertaining to a UI a concrete UI that we generated. So if we look at the history browser, you can see the same interface that we've seen before twice already. You have the users who created certain elements. In this case, the elements are concrete UI elements. So they're labels, group boxes, text boxes, and so on. But the other type of viewer is a different way of, provides a different way of viewing changes. This is called the history player. This doesn't only display the changes as data, but it rather allows users to play back sessions that were conducted to modify certain diagram. So in this case, we're going to play back the session that involved creating this concrete user interface. So we're going to use this data to recreate the visual diagram as we go along. So let's say play, and let's use moderate speed for the playback. And you can see over here that as the playing progresses, just like a video, the tool reconstructs the diagram one step at a time and provides information above to say what's being done. For example, Jane is updating the text of a certain label, or Jane is changing, let's say, the font of a certain label, and so on. Users working with this tool can move forward on the timeline in order to see the different changes. Mind that this is not a video, this is an actual model being created. So if you notice over here, these are actual text boxes, this is an actual combo box. So we are recreating the model. The reason why we're doing that is to allow users to actually view the changes on the right hand side over here and be able to go to particular sections within this playback session. For example, users can say that we want to go to the part where, let's say, Jane created label 4. They can just double click this and they can go to that part in particular, just like as they would do on the timeline over here. We want to go to the place where Jane updated the text of label 3 to phone, and that's here. Jane updated that to phone. Similarly, this list of changes can be filtered out using the search bar, as we've done before. So for example, we can show certain type of operation but not the other. We can show, for example, the operations that were created only by John rather than John and Jane, and so on. Now finally, after having a look at different designers and different ways of viewing changes, it's time to look at the contribution reports that represent the work that has been done by different users on all these models and diagrams that we've seen. So we're going to look at two types of reports that represent contributions with respect to two metrics, time and points. Let's have a look at the time report first. In this case, we are seeing two sets of charts. The first one is the time that the users dedicated in order to conduct tracked activities. If you recall before, we said that users can specify what kind of activities to track. And we are also seeing the time that the users dedicated to work on all activities, whether they're tracked or not. We can see that the report shows the time that has been basically dedicated by both teams and users. So we have in this case two teams, Team A and Team B, and 4 users, Jane, John, Carol, and Corey. And again, they're color coded, and you can see the time in minutes that the teams and team members have dedicated to work on the models and diagrams that we've previously explored. If we look at the points report, we can see something similar, but in this case the contribution is being measured by points, and points are based on a pre-configured set of points that is related to the type of activity that we've selected every time we try to enter a diagram, and related to the type of operation being conducted, creating elements, updating elements, and deleting elements. You can see over here again the contribution points of the users as distributed as a percentage, and the points per type of operation that they conducted. So whether, let's say, they classes or deleted classes, so on and so forth. We can see as well the distribution of points by team as we saw in the time report. Of course, in both cases we can filter out this data. We can say, for example, we would like to search for the points of say Jane, for example, and say search, and now we only see, let's say, Jane's contributions, and we want to see Jane's contributions that are particular to create operations, and we can filter those out as well and see notes over here. These are the points that pertain to the operations that involve creating elements, like let's say combo boxes and text boxes in concrete UI models, and let's say classes and fields in class diagrams. So these two reports allow users to explore the contributions that have been conducted on models and diagrams.